G'day, it's Chris. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to Flat Tank Journey and my little wedge tank. I've had some things go well this week, but I've had some things not go so well. I've had the clutch apart and the gearbox apart. I get the gearbox back in the frame. I've got the wrong clutch actuation arm, and I have a look at the gear change lever and some other stuff. Some of it's gone really well. Hope you enjoy the episode. Cheers. It's time to have a little look at this gearbox off the wedge tank. It doesn't look super, but you know, it is what it is. So I started working on the clutch side, and I didn't give myself much of a chance of this coming apart. I undid the 4 nuts off the outside of the, I don't know, on an M20 it holds the spring in, or it's what lifts the clutch up. Now these look like those special nuts that go on the other side of the gearbox, but I don't know. And that came off really easy and as clean as a whistle. Caught me off guard. Didn't expect this to be clean or for it to come apart easily. Took out the nut that holds the clutch onto the end of what I would call the main shaft. It came off easily. Somebody's been into the gearbox. You know, the gearbox isn't untouched. I'll leave the nut on the floor. I didn't go any further with the clutch. The springs look clean and everything looks okay. It will have to come apart. I just don't actually know how it comes apart. So this nut looks like you put you can put a punch into it and tap it around and it'll come off. But then I'd need to compress it again to get it back on. There'll be a clutch plate, a metal plate and a friction plate, but for now I don't need to go any further with that. So I'm just going to leave that alone. Then I just used a brass hammer and I took off the sprocket. It just presses over what I'd call very large splines, and that was easy enough too. So, you know, at this stage, everything's going really smoothly, which is not like me, and I forget where that came from, but it came from somewhere important. Held that on, sorry. Nut held the sprocket on. There's threads and the nut goes here and holds the sprocket on. Mental blank. Other side of the box, I pulled off the clutch actuation arm and the kickstarter. The kickstarter is still dubious to me as to whether it's a bicycle crank, but maybe not. I might use it anyway because I think they had a straight one. This is slightly more complex and I'll need to take some bits and pieces off one piece at a time, and that's why I thought I'd take some footage. I'll show you too. There's 2 nuts missing. So let me get some tools and some bits and bobs, and then we'll get in and take this front cover off and see what's inside. I think this has got the potential to be clean inside because I think someone's been in it, or they've been in the clutch anyway. Hang on and we'll find some bits and pieces. Rightio. Let's see how it comes apart. Well, the screws come out. So there's 1, 2, 3 screws. Cheese head that kind of look like they've always been there. And we'll shoot through and get these out. And if this was a 100-year-old gearbox that had never been apart, I wouldn't expect these to come out easily. I've been looking at images for the gear change lever, and it seems that I have a gear change lever that's been broken and it's then been riveted back onto the selector fork, and that seems to be a thing that happened with these gearboxes or the shifters. Might have been a weak point in them and people bodged them back together. That's just a square fitting. and this is sprung loaded to go into the top of the selector plate so that it'll hold where it goes. And that's relatively clean. Again, it came off just a bit easy, which tells me it wasn't always there. Just going to put a few pieces back together. That's come off really easily. I'm going to put the nuts and bolts back in the plate that they came out of. Maybe they're not even original bolts. They don't look it. The thread's not fine enough. There's another screw. Hiding behind that plate. And then there's just one nut left down the bottom, and it's loose too. So again, tells me someone's been into the gearbox, and who knows what we'll find. Let's hope it's not like the rally where we find bits that don't belong in there. Don't reach for a brass hammer. There we go. I hope you can see this. It's just knocking apart. That is as clean as. Somebody has done some work. How cool's that? I'm going to chance that whole thing. That's clean. That needs a new gasket, but that's pretty cool. I'm just a little bit excited. That wasn't what I expected to have happen. I didn't think that gearbox could possibly be okay inside. I expected a mountain of grease, oil, gunk, crap, broken gears. I'm so excited I can get you off the tripod and you can have a look inside too. Just shows sometimes you get better than you expect. Hang on while we have a look. Just going to wipe my hands. And so at this point in the video, I've lost all sound. I've just picked up the clutch off the bench, and you can see, the teeth are in quite reasonable condition, and the springs and the spring plate. And that nut is what provides compression across the 8 springs. Then that cap goes over the top and bolts down to the plate, and then the clutch rod comes through, pulling that and the clutch apart so that you get a decompression of the clutch and the clutch will slip. That's just the sprocket that was pressed into the gearbox and the nut that was on the back. This is the gear shift actuation with the spring detent in the top and the selector that shows you what gear you're in. Now we're into the meat and potatoes of the gearbox. You can see that there's a little repair job there on the selector, and you can see that everything's really clean. Really surprised. Looking inside the box, again, gearbox is not really my thing, but when you look in, you can see that that's clean. Somebody has cleaned all the gears, put all that together, gone to some trouble. It does select gears, and I did know that before I pulled it apart, but I wasn't expecting it to look like that inside. It's just too clean, too good a condition. So I'm really, really surprised at this point to see it look like that. Clutch. Just thought I'd have a look inside. So at this point, I've got the nut loose enough that it just comes off. I thought it might take my head off as I undid the nut. What have we got inside? So we had a plate with 4, 6, 8 pins on the back of it. And then there's 8 clutch springs. They don't look too bad. I don't know. They're clean. There's an outer plate. And it's really clean. Again, someone's been in here. And there's one friction disc. So that's all there is. That's it. Wow. There's a centre with a roller bearing to it. That comes off. Oh no, there's the second one. So I'm glad I pulled it off. Could do with a clean and a fair bit of grease, because that roller bearing's just a bit, not roller bearing, ball bearings in a brass frame. And that centre will come out. And there's the second friction disc. Wow. Wowza. Wowza. So what you have is a back, you have a friction disc and a metal plate. And the teeth are on the metal plate. That fits neatly over the bearing, I think. Now keep in mind I haven't had this apart before. Yeah, so that goes over the bearing. Then there's another friction plate. That's pretty amazing. And then there's a friction plate on the outside. I suppose this is not high power. 2 1/4 or 1 3/4 horsepower. And that's all that holds this jobby together. What a ripper. What a little ripper. Nothing in there. The friction plates don't look horrible. What do they measure? They measure 3.18, so is that 3/16 in old measurement? Don't know. No, it's less than that. I think 3/16 is 5 mil. Yeah, this is 3.07, so it's 0.121 of an inch. Something like that. So 307 and 315. There's a pair of them. They're pretty worn looking. They're a bit greasy looking, but I assume they're meant to have oil in them or dry. No, don't know. Don't know, but what a super little clutch. What a super little clutch. And she just presses together like that. As I say, the bearings could all do with a little bit of grease and bit of a service, perhaps even a new one if I can get one. And it's a good result. That's pleasing too. I will put all that in a container and keep that in a safe place. But there you go. That's what the inside of the Wedge Tank's clutch looks like. Super. I've got a bit excited over the clutch, so the back of the disc that goes on first is black, and the other side cleaned up super with a wire brush and on the wheel. And I did the same with that main piece there. I don't even know what it's called. I just threw a little bit of copper grease actually off brake pads, because that's what I had onto that bearing, because it was dry as chips. And yeah, that feels much better. Then I'm going to throw this back on. I haven't cleaned up the sprocket because I'm overexcited and got back to shooting video too quickly. So bear with me and I'll clean this up and we'll come back in a minute. Grinder's winding down in the background. And I've got that cleaned up enough to put back on. A tiny little wood chip, because I'm working where I had the wood lathe. And then of course that goes back in there, and that clean plate goes back on there, and then all of these go back together. And I'm just going to put this back together for the sake of the argument, because inevitably if you don't, you lose something. So I'm going to clean all this up, put all this back together. All the time I'm looking for things that are wrong. You know, you're looking for parts that are broken. These could be springs off anything. You wouldn't know. Somebody may have replaced them for something else. But they seem to go in okay. Line that up. And then you tension that top nut down to get tension on the springs, which gives you tension on the clutch, which means you can then pull this front disc away from the friction plates, which lets the whole lot slip, and you end up with a functioning clutch. Unbelievable. I'm going to put this top cover back on. I might have to tighten the nut down a bit more, and then I'll have the clutch all back together, and I'll hunt up some new friction discs, because that'd be better. So it's a new day in the shed, and it's a little bit since I got really excited about the gearbox. And you can probably tell in the video that, you know, I'm pretty pleased with the way it looks. Now, that doesn't mean that it actually functions and changes gears and all of that. It just means that, you know, when you open these things up, they look about right. It looks really clean. So, you know, don't get overexcited like I did. It may be a piece of trash after all. But look, we're back. And I found a drain plug for it, which was exciting. And I'm short the filler plug, so that was pretty good. But the drain plug, I've actually got 3 of them, and that was really good. So it's just, I'll unscrew it, it's just a small plug, bolt with a flange on the back of it. I suppose in reality I could have made one, but you know, through the junk box, I found 3 of them. And there's 2 more there, and they're a little bit moth-eaten, so I picked the best one. I need a little bit of a fibre washer to go on it before I attempt to put oil in it or anything like that. But, you know, it was a good result. I'm well pleased. So I'll put that back in. The plug on the filler is a little bit more problematic. I had 2 odd-looking plugs that screwed in, neither of which go close, but one of which looks as though it's that kind of thing. Now, it's probably out of the engine, truth be told. So I'll put those aside and see what we think of those later. I've been through the parts pile, so to speak, and had a look, and I really can't find anything that fits. It's actually really quite big. I'm going to guess it's a 3/4 inch hole, because a spark plug goes in and is really loose. So, and spark plugs are 14mm, so spark plug thread isn't even close. So I reckon it's 3/4, or, you know, what else could it be? 5/8, I suppose, is in the middle. Yeah, look, I'm guessing it's 3/4, but something will turn up. That's the sort of thing I will be able to make or buy or beg or borrow a steal. I'm going to try and put this into the bike and see what it looks like in the bike. There we go. That went in really easily First thing I did was undo these bolts. So, you know, they get a fair bit of tension on them, and I've already damaged the powder coating. But it is what it is. Could have dry built the whole thing first, but I chose not to. So they have a 3/8 stud go on them, and the 3/8 studs go in here, or bolts, or whatever they were. I don't have a lot of fixings. I have this odd 3/8 that may go through and may take this fitting. I emphasise the may. So I think this is the gearbox adjuster, and it goes in here, or at least I hope it does, and I'll bring you down and show you in a minute. And I think this could be the bolt that goes, and I'll show you. It has a flat and a round step, and then coincidentally the round bit fits in, leaves the flat on the back, and then the flat would, in theory, go through the rail on the frame when it was in the right place and the powder wasn't holding it out, and I think it is, and it would go through properly, and you'd be left with the gearbox adjuster hanging out. I'm going to see if I can get all that to fit, and then I'll bring you down and show you what it looks like. Here are the pieces for the gearbox adjuster. This little piece goes through the frame, and it goes in just about there, or at least I think it does. This bit clips into it, and then the whole thing should be able, when you get the adjuster nut in the right place, to just push in. And I'm just going to give that bolt a little tap. And of course, when I'm showing you, it won't fit. And there it all goes. There's a little nut and a washer that goes on the back, and then there'll be a nut and a washer that'll go on the other side. And I don't know, I can feel perhaps a centimetre of thread. I actually haven't looked over there. And that is how that's going to fit, or at least I think it does. Hop off the tripod, have a look. Here's a better look at how all that fits, and you can see that by turning this, we can move the gearbox backwards and forwards. It's pretty clever, if I'm honest, and having the original fitting, the original bolt, means that this sits correctly, and that's flat against the gearbox mounts, and goes through, and then we'll look at the other side. But that's how I think it all fits. Pretty cool. Let's have a look at that. While we moved around the bike, I picked up a nut and a washer. That's just a flat washer and a 3/8 nut. That's going to tighten up there pretty good. I'm going to grab a spanner, give it a little nip up, and then I'm going to do something about making a stud or looking for a bolt that might fit in the front. I don't think I have an original bolt. Let's see what I can find. Hasn't been difficult. I've got a bit of 3/8 round bar. I cut the threads on the ends, and I didn't bother showing you. You've seen me do it before. If you're going to treat yourself to any tools, taps and dies, you know, just don't even have to be expensive ones. I've put a flat washer and a spring washer because it's the gearbox, and I probably think it's worth it. Now, I'm going to try and feed this underneath from the back so that I'm not in your road, but I'm not sure I'll be able to get it in. know what they say? A 2-minute job is only one broken bolt away from 2 days hard labour. Well, not 2 days hard labour, but half an hour later, I'm back and I've got the stud through. And I actually had to relieve the slot in the gearbox mount with a burr to get the 3/8 stud to go through the gearbox mount. I didn't have to relieve it much. Not so much that I thought it was a different size, but certainly it didn't matter what I did. It wasn't going to fit. So on the other side, I've got a flat washer, a spring washer, and a nut. And because I've had to tap it through, I'd suggest there's a little burr on the end of the nut, but maybe that's not a bad thing. But I'll have to remember that when I go to get it off, to disassemble. Because surely I won't have everything in the right place at the right time. But that's more or less our gearbox install. It looks pretty good, and I can just nip these back up again so that they're not sitting loose. Not that they need to be, I suppose, but I'm a bit of a weirdo for it. That looks good. And then the big bolt at the back here, which is a different size. We'll just nip that back up too. And everything will look good. Now that probably took me, I don't know, better part of an hour and a bit to just get those few little bits and pieces together. But it looks pretty good. I've got the gear selector piece that I think I'll put back on, because I think that's probably the best place for it. So it's got, it's the one that came off the box, and it's got the genuine bolts through it, and I think it's probably the best idea. So let me get that back on, and we'll see where we go from there. Now, I think it goes this way, because the selector then sits in these notches. And I'm hoping you can see the notches here and here. So it'll go through with a bolt from the front and another bolt from the front. I might just tighten up that screw. These old bikes literally are like I built them myself. They need to go together in a certain order, or they don't go together properly. It's not too bad if you've only got to pull one part off, but if you've got to pull a dozen pieces off, it gets a bit frustrating. Right, back to where we started from. Yep, right here. Let's take a chance and hope that I'm right. And there's a little bit of adjustment left in those, and I can just pop the nuts on the back. And there we go. There's the selector indicator, if you like, back on the bike. I might put the gear change arm back on too, so I don't lose it, and we can have a look at that and have a talk about it, because my gear change lever is actually broken, and when I look at images online, it appears this is a common problem. Let me get a few more bits and pieces and we'll move forward. Here's my selector arm, if you like, and you can see it's got 4 holes drilled in it. Now I should have picked this to start with. They're agricultural looking holes. They're not, they don't look like they were done at a factory. They look like somebody did them in the back shed. And that's exactly what it is. Here's the spring detent piece that sits in here and stops the lever moving around, and the spring from over the top. Going to put those back in too, because they've got lose me or forget what I am written all over them. And then the whole lot goes back in like this. Or at least I think it does. And it goes back over like that. And when you tighten this nut up, you can get the whole thing to pull back where it came from. Come on. And sometimes when you do it right-handed, it's easier. Who knows why? Now, from what I can see online, I'll grab my gear change lever and we'll talk then. Here's my gear change lever. And I believe this to be genuine. It is very beaten up. And it's actually broken, which is a bit of a pity. I don't think it's uncommon though. Here's the 4 holes and there's still a rivet in the top one, and you can see this one's got a rivet, and I'll just loosely assemble it. But what it had was a tab down here with a hole in it that went over the gearbox. And I believe that's all it had, which led to loose fittings and breakages. Or that's what I'm thinking happened, and the tab snapped off the bottom. So the fix people put in was to drill some holes and to rivet it on. And I've just lost the spring detent out of the top. Now, I could do that again, and maybe it's for the best. I'm not really sure. If I found a really nice gear change lever, I'd definitely buy one. I think I'd like to see. I'd like to see a nice gear change lever on it. Here's the clutch actuation rod that came with the bike, and it's got the top snapped off it, which is, yeah, a bit of a shame, but it is. Here's the one I got off Gary. Reproduction made by his friend, and it's going to go straight back in where that one came out of. Using the original bolt. And that's super. That needs a little nut on the other side, and I'll get one of those. And then I need to build an adjuster that goes through there. I've got that round the wrong way. Let me get that out and put that in the correct way. And I'll explain why it was in the wrong way. This goes in one way or the other. And when I looked at it, I imagined a bolt went through and there was a recess. That's not true. Now, probably a ball bearing sits in the end of that, and an adjuster bolt goes in from the outside, probably. I'm going to be able to get that on. Yep. Now I'm going to pop a little nut on that, and that would operate as an adjuster with a lock nut. It's not very classy, and it probably looked better than that originally. And I can't get that nut on there. There we go. Hope this doesn't bore you. There it goes. It'll go in there. And then you would be able to lock off adjustment to the clutch using the bolt to take up any slack in the cable. Now, I suspect, and you know, one of you will tell me that it looked a little bit classier than that. It wasn't just, you know, a 1/4 inch bolt hanging out. Would it do? Yeah. Yeah, that'd do the job. I think it probably was something like that. Then this goes through there. Gonna get another nut. I actually had a couple of nylock threaded nuts somewhere, but can't find them. So that will go over there. We'll be able to nip that up. And that will operate just fine from there, or at least I think it does. Looks a little bit low. And the cable end goes through here and goes through there. Does look a bit low. Wonder if I have the right arm. Possibly not. Possibly have the wrong arm. Well, there you go. After all my procrastination and efforts there, I think I have the wrong clutch activation arm. I think it's an inch short. I remember being at Gary's and we discussed which arm it was, and we both thought it was the short arm, but it's not. It's the long arm. No biggie. I'll get a long arm, and I think Gary had some, and we'll be able to swap that out and put something else in. In the meantime, fitting it now means that I've found out early that I have the wrong one, so I can move on and get the right one and make changes early in proceedings, rather than, you know, you're fitting the clutch actuation arm and you're at the last thread. Here's my bicycle crank, or my Kickstarter. Depends on how you look at it. I've given a little wire brush. On the back of it, there's a very small logo. It isn't the rifles though, so I don't know what it is. It looks like an E and a W, and then below that is an S, and in the middle is something else. What is it? I don't really know. Will it do for now? Well, probably. Onto there, I've just popped a rubber that I had, and I don't have a cotter pin for it at this stage. There was a bolt in there, but it was a bolt with the back shaved off. It really needs a cotter pin, a proper one. Maybe I'll make one, and we'll see how that goes. But there you go. That's, you know, the Kickstarter sitting in place. I'll bring you backwards and you can have a look at the whole lot. It looks about right. You know, it's got a little bend, but, you know, they all bend from people kicking the life out of them. It looks about right. It needs a proper cotter pin, and of course it needs a spring, and I'll have to hunt one of them up or do something about it. I've got the clutch sitting just to the side to go back on the other side, and I hope it goes back on really soon with some new clutch discs, but we'll see about that. Pity about this piece, but it is what it is. There you go. There's a little gearbox work on the bike, and the bike's starting to look better, or at least I feel like it's looking better. What do you think? Progress this week, slow, is what it is. Waiting for parts, sorting stuff out, and finding time, and that's the real world. Hope you enjoyed. Hit the like button, maybe you comment, because I enjoy that. Or most of all, maybe you'd subscribe. Cheers, have a good one.